Dr. Sarah Martinez had never imagined her medical mission in Afghanistan would turn into a life-or-death situation. The small field hospital where she volunteered sat on the edge of a village that had seen too much war. Sarah had come here 6 months ago, fresh out of her residency, determined to help people who had no access to proper medical care. The morning started like any other. Sarah was checking on patients when she heard the familiar sound of helicopters approaching. Military helicopters often brought wounded soldiers to their small clinic. The local Afghan staff knew the routine well, and everyone prepared for incoming casualties. But this time was different. The helicopter landed hard, and Sarah could see through the window that it was smoking. Something had gone wrong. The pilot was shouting into his radio while medics jumped out, carrying a stretcher. On it lay a man in military uniform, unconscious and bleeding heavily. "We need help now," shouted one of the medics as they rushed toward the clinic. "Commander's been hit bad. We're taking fire from the hills." Sarah ran outside to meet them. The wounded man was tall and muscular, probably in his early 30s. His uniform bore the insignia of a Navy SEAL. Blood soaked through his tactical vest and his breathing was shallow. Sarah could see he had been shot multiple times. "Get him inside, quickly," Sarah ordered, taking charge. She had treated gunshot wounds before, but never under these circumstances. As they lifted the stretcher, she noticed his dog tags. The name read, Commander Jake Sullivan. Inside the clinic, Sarah worked fast. She cut away his vest and shirt to assess the damage. 2 bullets had hit him, one in the shoulder and another in his side. The shoulder wound was clean, but the side wound was more serious. She could see the bullet had damaged internal organs. "I need all hands," Sarah called to her small team. Dr. Ahmad, the local physician, and 2 nurses rushed to help. They had limited supplies and equipment, but Sarah was determined to save this man's life. As she worked to stop the bleeding, explosions echoed outside. The Taliban fighters who had shot down the helicopter were getting closer. The remaining SEAL team members had taken defensive positions around the clinic, but Sarah could hear gunfire getting louder. "Doc, we need to move him," said Sergeant Miller, the team's medic. "They're closing in. We can't hold this position much longer." "I can't move him yet," Sarah replied, her hands covered in blood as she worked on the commander's wounds. "He'll die if I don't get this bleeding stopped." Another explosion, closer this time. The windows of the clinic rattled and dust fell from the ceiling. Sarah could hear bullets hitting the walls outside. Her heart was racing, but her hands remained steady. Years of medical training had taught her to stay calm under pressure. Commander Sullivan's eyes suddenly opened. Despite his pain, they were sharp and alert. He tried to speak, but Sarah placed her hand on his chest. "Don't try to talk," she said softly. "You're badly hurt, but I'm going to fix you up." He looked at her with gratitude in his eyes before losing consciousness again. Sarah continued working, removing the bullet from his side and repairing the damage as best she could with limited resources. The gunfire outside was getting intense. Sergeant Miller appeared at her side again. "Doc, I'm sorry, but we have to go. Now. The chopper pilot says he can get us out, but only if we leave in the next 5 minutes." Sarah looked at Commander Sullivan. She had managed to stop the major bleeding, but he needed surgery in a proper hospital. Moving him now was risky, but staying meant certain death for everyone. "Help me get him ready for transport," she said, "and I'm coming with you." "Ma'am, that's not possible," Sergeant Miller protested. "This is a combat zone. You're a civilian." "I'm also the only doctor who knows his condition," Sarah said firmly. "He won't survive the flight without medical attention. Either I come with you or he dies here." Dr. Ahmad grabbed Sarah's arm. "You cannot go. This is madness. You have patients here who need you." Sarah looked around the clinic at the other patients, local villagers with various injuries and illnesses. Leaving them felt wrong, but Commander Sullivan would definitely die without her help. She made the hardest decision of her life. "Take care of them," she told Dr. Ahmad. "I'll be back as soon as I can." They loaded Commander Sullivan into the helicopter as bullets flew around them. Sarah climbed in beside the stretcher, her medical bag in hand. She had never been in a military helicopter before, and the noise was overwhelming. As they lifted off, Sarah saw muzzle flashes from the hills below. The Taliban fighters were shooting at them, and she could hear bullets hitting the aircraft. The pilot was shouting something, but she couldn't understand over the noise. Commander Sullivan's condition was getting worse. His blood pressure was dropping, and his pulse was weak. Sarah worked frantically in the cramped space of the helicopter, trying to keep him stable. She started an IV and gave him medication to support his blood pressure. Halfway to the base hospital, the helicopter started shaking violently. Something was wrong with the engine. The pilot was struggling to keep them in the air. Sarah looked out the window and saw smoke trailing behind them. "We're going down," the pilot shouted. "Everyone hold on." The helicopter made an emergency landing in an open field. It was a hard landing, and everyone was thrown around inside. Sarah hit her head on the ceiling, but immediately checked on Commander Sullivan. Miraculously, he was still alive. "The engine's shot," said the pilot. "We're not flying anywhere. I've radioed for backup, but it'll be at least an hour before they can reach us." Sarah looked around. They were in the middle of nowhere with a critically injured patient and limited supplies. Commander Sullivan was fading fast. She had to do something drastic to save his life. "I need to operate here," she announced. "Right now." "Here? In a field?" Sergeant Miller asked in disbelief. "It's his only chance," Sarah replied. "Help me set up a sterile area." Using their limited supplies, Sarah created a makeshift operating room on the ground beside the crashed helicopter. With the SEAL team providing security, she began emergency surgery on Commander Sullivan under the open sky. It was the most challenging operation of her career, but she was determined to save the man who had already captured her admiration with his courage and strength. Sarah's hands moved with precision despite the unusual circumstances. Operating in an open field with basic instruments was something she had never trained for, but desperation drove her forward. Commander Sullivan's life hung in the balance, and she was his only hope. The SEAL team formed a protective circle around the makeshift operating area. Sergeant Miller held a flashlight to provide better lighting as the sun began to set. Sarah worked quickly, knowing that every minute counted. The bullet had caused more internal damage than she initially thought. "His spleen is damaged," she muttered to herself, carefully examining the wound. "I need to repair this or he'll bleed internally." As she worked, Commander Sullivan regained consciousness briefly. His eyes found hers, and despite his pain, he managed a weak smile. "Thank you," he whispered before slipping back into unconsciousness. Those two words strengthened Sarah's resolve. She had seen many patients over the years, but something about this brave soldier touched her heart in a way she couldn't explain. Maybe it was his courage or the way his team clearly respected and cared for him. Whatever it was, she was determined not to lose him. The surgery took 2 hours. When Sarah finally stepped back, she was exhausted but hopeful. Commander Sullivan's vital signs had stabilized, and the bleeding had stopped. She had done everything possible under the circumstances. The rescue helicopter arrived just as she finished bandaging his wounds. The medical team on board was amazed that she had performed surgery in a field with such limited resources. They carefully transferred Commander Sullivan to their aircraft and flew him to the main military hospital in Kandahar. Sarah accompanied him during the flight, monitoring his condition. At the hospital, a team of military surgeons took over his care. They were impressed with her work and told her that her quick thinking and surgical skills had saved his life. "He's going to make a full recovery," said Colonel Roberts, the chief surgeon. "What you did out there was remarkable. You saved the life of one of our best officers." Sarah spent the next 3 days at the hospital, checking on Commander Sullivan's progress. When he finally woke up fully, she was sitting beside his bed, reading a medical journal. "The angel who saved my life," he said, his voice still weak but much stronger than before. Sarah looked up and smiled. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot twice and had surgery in a field," he replied with a grin. "But alive thanks to you." They talked for hours that day. Commander Sullivan told her about his mission and how his team had been ambushed. Sarah shared stories about her work at the clinic and why she had chosen to volunteer in Afghanistan. Despite their different backgrounds, they found they had much in common. Jake, as he insisted she call him, was from a small town in Texas. He had joined the Navy after college and worked his way up to become a SEAL commander. He was intelligent, funny, and clearly dedicated to his mission and his men. Sarah learned that Jake's team had been conducting a rescue mission to save captured aid workers when they were ambushed. The fact that he had been wounded while helping others made her admire him even more. Over the next few days, as Jake recovered, they spent more time together. Sarah would visit during her breaks from the clinic, which she had returned to after ensuring Jake was stable. Their conversations ranged from serious topics about the war to lighter subjects like their favorite books and movies. "I've never met anyone like you," Jake told her one evening as they sat on the hospital balcony watching the sunset. "You risked your life to save mine." "Why?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Because that's what doctors do. We save lives no matter the circumstances." "It was more than that," Jake insisted. "You could have let the military medics handle it. You didn't have to come on that helicopter or operate in a field." Sarah couldn't fully explain it to him because she didn't completely understand it herself. Something about Jake had compelled her to act beyond her normal duties. There was a connection she felt that went deeper than the doctor-patient relationship. When Jake was well enough to be transferred to Germany for further treatment, Sarah felt a sadness she hadn't expected. They had only known each other for a week, but it felt like much longer. "I'll write to you," Jake promised as they wheeled him to the transport plane. "And when I'm back on my feet, I'm going to find you and properly thank you for saving my life." Sarah smiled, though her heart was heavy. "Just focus on getting better. That's all the thanks I need." She watched the plane disappear into the sky, wondering if she would ever see Jake Sullivan again. The war zone was unpredictable, and people came and went from her life regularly. But something told her that Jake was different, that their paths would cross again. Back at the clinic, Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She had saved a life under impossible circumstances, and the experience had given her confidence she never knew she possessed. Word of her heroic surgery spread among the international medical community working in Afghanistan. Dr. Ahmad noticed the change in her. "You are different since the helicopter incident," he observed one day as they treated patients together. "More focused, more determined," Sarah nodded. "I learned that I'm capable of more than I thought. Sometimes we don't know our own strength until we're tested." The letters from Jake began arriving 2 weeks later. He wrote about his recovery in Germany, his gratitude for her actions, and his hopes to return to duty soon. Sarah looked forward to his letters, which were funny, thoughtful, and gave her a glimpse into the man behind the uniform. In her replies, Sarah told him about life at the clinic, the patients she treated, and the small victories and challenges of working in a war zone. Their correspondence became a bright spot in her difficult days. 3 months after the incident, Sarah received news that would change everything. Jake's commanding officer, Colonel Mitchell, visited the clinic with an unusual request. "Dr. Martinez," he said, "Commander Sullivan has recommended you for a commendation for your actions under fire. But more than that, he's requested that when your volunteer term ends, you consider a position with our medical unit." Sarah was surprised. "A military position?" "As a civilian contractor," Colonel Mitchell explained. "You'd work with our special operations medical teams, providing advanced surgical support in combat zones. It's dangerous work, but Commander Sullivan believes you have the skills and courage for it." The offer was tempting, but Sarah had already committed to another 6 months at the clinic. She told Colonel Mitchell she would consider it when her current assignment ended. That evening, she sat alone outside the clinic, looking up at the stars and thinking about Jake's offer. Working with military medical teams would be challenging and dangerous, but it would also allow her to use her skills in ways that could save more lives. As she contemplated her future, Sarah didn't know that Jake was already planning something that would change both their lives forever. His recovery was going better than expected, and he had been cleared to return to limited duty. But before he returned to the field, he had a promise to keep, and a question to ask that had been on his mind since the day a brave doctor saved his life in the middle of nowhere. 6 months had passed since Sarah performed that life-saving surgery in the Afghan field. Her volunteer assignment at the clinic was coming to an end, and she was preparing to return to the United States. The experience had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Jake's letters had become more frequent and more personal. He wrote about his complete recovery and his return to active duty. But more importantly, he wrote about his feelings for her and how she had changed his perspective on life. "I think about that day often," he wrote in one letter, "not just because you saved my life, but because meeting you showed me what real courage looks like. You didn't hesitate to risk everything for a stranger. That kind of person is rare, and I can't stop thinking about you." Sarah found herself reading his letters multiple times, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the Afghan heat. She had dated before, but never had anyone affected her the way Jake did. There was something about his strength, his humor, and his dedication that drew her to him. One morning, Dr. Ahmad approached Sarah with a concerned expression. "There is someone here to see you. A military officer. He says it is urgent." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Had something happened to Jake? She rushed to the front of the clinic where a young lieutenant was waiting. "Dr. Martinez? I'm Lieutenant Davis. Commander Sullivan sent me. He's here in Afghanistan and would like to see you if possible." Relief flooded through Sarah. "He's here? Is he all right?" "Yes, ma'am. He's fine. He arrived yesterday with his new assignment. He was hoping you might be free for dinner tonight." Sarah couldn't hide her excitement. She had been wondering when she might see Jake again, and now he was here. "Yes, I'd like that very much." That evening, Sarah waited nervously at the small restaurant on the American base where they had arranged to meet. When Jake walked in, her breath caught in her throat. He looked healthy and strong, with no signs of his previous injuries. But more than that, he looked happy to see her. "Sarah," he said, approaching her table with a broad smile, "you look beautiful." "You look pretty good yourself for someone who was bleeding to death 6 months ago," she replied, standing to hug him. The embrace lasted longer than a typical friendly hug, and Sarah felt the same connection she had felt when she first looked into his eyes. There was definitely something special between them. Over dinner, they caught up on everything that had happened since Jake's transfer to Germany. He told her about his recovery, his new assignment, and his decision to request a posting back to Afghanistan. "I requested to come back here," Jake admitted. "My commanding officer thought I was crazy, wanting to return to the place where I almost died. But I had to see you again." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Jake, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. My assignment here is ending." "I know," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "That's why I'm here. I couldn't let you leave without telling you how I feel." The honesty in his voice made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. She had been hoping he felt the same way she did, but hearing him say it made it real. "I've been thinking about you every day since I left," Jake continued. "Not just because you saved my life, but because I think I'm falling in love with you." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." They spent the next 2 weeks together whenever their schedules allowed. Jake was based about an hour away from Sarah's clinic, but he made the trip as often as possible. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears about the future. Jake told Sarah about growing up in Texas, his close relationship with his parents, and his decision to become a SEAL. Sarah shared stories about medical school, her decision to volunteer in Afghanistan, and her plans for the future. "What will you do when you get back to the States?" Jake asked one evening as they walked around the base. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "I've been offered a position at Johns Hopkins, but I've also been thinking about Colonel Mitchell's offer to work with military medical teams." Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. "You're considering the military contract? It would mean more time in places like this helping people who really need it. And it would mean possibly working with teams like yours." "It would also mean danger," Jake said seriously. "What happened with my team could happen again." "You could be in combat situations regularly," Sarah nodded. "I know the risks, but I also know I can handle it. You taught me that. I taught you. That day when everything went wrong, I discovered I was capable of things I never imagined. I operated in a field under gunfire and saved a life. If I can do that, I can handle whatever comes next." Jake admired her courage, but he also worried about her safety. He knew better than anyone how dangerous their world could be. The night before Sarah was scheduled to leave Afghanistan, Jake took her to a quiet spot on the base where they could see the stars clearly. The same stars she had looked at months earlier when considering her future. "I have something to ask you," Jake said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Sarah's heart stopped. "Jake, what are you doing?" "I know this might seem crazy," he said, getting down on one knee. "We've only known each other for 6 months, and most of that time we've been apart. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "Sarah Martinez, you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me what love looks like, what courage means, and what I want my future to be. Will you marry me?" Sarah stared at the ring, her mind racing. It was crazy. They barely knew each other. She was about to start a new chapter of her life, and marriage wasn't part of her immediate plans. But as she looked into Jake's eyes, she saw the same man who had thanked her with his dying breath, who had written her thoughtful letters for months, who had requested to return to a war zone just to see her again. She saw a man who loved her enough to propose after 6 months, despite all the uncertainties ahead. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her. It was a kiss full of promise, hope, and love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. "So what now?" Sarah asked, looking at the ring sparkling in the moonlight. "Now we figure out how to build a life together," Jake said. "It won't be easy with our careers, but we'll make it work." "I want to take the military contract," Sarah said suddenly. "I want to use my skills where they're needed most, even if it's dangerous." Jake nodded, understanding. "Then we'll both be serving our country in our own ways. We'll face the dangers together." As they stood under the Afghan stars, Sarah realized that the decision she had made 6 months ago to save a stranger's life had changed everything. She had found her calling, her courage, and her love all in this harsh, beautiful place. Neither of them knew what challenges lay ahead, but they knew they would face them together. Their love story had begun with gunfire and emergency surgery, and it would continue wherever their service took them. The next morning, Sarah boarded the plane to return to the United States, wearing Jake's ring and carrying his promise that they would be together soon. She was no longer the uncertain young doctor who had arrived in Afghanistan a year earlier. She was a woman who had discovered her strength, found her love, and was ready for whatever came next. Sarah returned to the United States with a diamond ring on her finger and a completely different perspective on her future. The familiar sights of American cities felt strange after a year in Afghanistan. Everything seemed too clean, too quiet, too safe. Her first stop was her family home in California. Her parents, both doctors themselves, were shocked by her engagement news. Dr. Robert Martinez, her father, was particularly concerned. "You're engaged to a man you've known for 6 months?" he asked, pacing around their living room. "Sarah, this isn't like you. You've always been so careful about big decisions." Her mother, Dr. Elena Martinez, was more supportive but equally worried. "Tell us about him, honey. What's he like?" Sarah spent hours telling her parents about Jake, about how they met, and about the connection they shared. She showed them his letters and talked about his character, his dedication, and his love for her. "He sounds wonderful," her mother said finally, "but your father is right to be concerned about the timing. Marriage is a big step." "I know it seems fast," Sarah admitted, "but when you almost watch someone die, when you save their life and they save yours in return, time moves differently." "I know Jake better than I've known anyone," her father sighed. "What about your career? You were accepted to Johns Hopkins. That's a tremendous opportunity." Sarah had been thinking about this constantly during her flight home. "I'm going to take the military contract instead. I'll be working with special operations medical teams." Both her parents looked alarmed. "That's even more dangerous than what you just did," her father protested. "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But it's where I can do the most good. And it's where Jake will be too." Sarah spent 2 weeks with her family, adjusting to life back home and preparing for her new position. The military medical contract was based out of North Carolina, close to where Jake would be stationed when he returned from Afghanistan. During this time, Jake called whenever he could. The time difference and his mission schedule made regular communication difficult, but they managed to talk every few days. Their conversations were precious to both of them. "I miss you already," Jake said during one call. "This place isn't the same without you." "I miss you too," Sarah replied. "But at least now I know we have a future together." That makes everything easier. Jake's deployment was scheduled to end in 3 months. They decided to plan their wedding for shortly after his return. It would be a small ceremony, just family and close friends. "I can't wait to marry you," Jake said. "I think about it every day." Sarah felt the same way. Despite the short time they had known each other, she had no doubts about their relationship. What they had been through together had created a bond that most couples took years to develop. Sarah started her new position with the military medical team 2 weeks after returning from Afghanistan. The base in North Carolina was larger and more modern than anywhere she had worked before. Her supervisor, Colonel Patricia Hayes, was a tough but fair woman who had heard about Sarah's field surgery. "Dr. Martinez," Colonel Hayes said during their first meeting, "your reputation precedes you. Commander Sullivan's report about your actions was quite impressive. Thank you, ma'am. I'm excited to be here. This job will be challenging, Colonel Hayes continued. You'll be working with special operations teams, often in dangerous situations. Are you prepared for that? Yes, ma'am. I learned a lot about myself in Afghanistan. I know I can handle whatever comes. Sarah's training began immediately. She learned about military protocols, combat medical procedures, and how to work effectively with special operations teams. The work was intense but fascinating. Her fellow medical officers welcomed her warmly. Many of them had heard about her engagement to Jake, and SEALs had a reputation that earned respect throughout the military. Dr. Michael Chen, one of her new colleagues, became a good friend. So you're marrying Jake Sullivan? He asked one day during a break. I know him by reputation. He's supposed to be one of the best SEAL commanders. He is, Sarah said proudly. He's also one of the best men I've ever known. How are you handling the separation? Military relationships are tough even under normal circumstances. Sarah had been wondering the same thing. We talk when we can and we write letters. It's hard, but we both knew this would be part of our lives. As the weeks passed, Sarah threw herself into her training and work. She was assigned to a team that provided medical support for various special operations missions. While she wasn't deployed overseas yet, she was preparing for that possibility. The work helped distract her from missing Jake, but nights were harder. She would lie in bed thinking about him, wondering if he was safe, counting down the days until his return. 2 months into her new position, Sarah received a call that changed everything. It was Jake's commanding officer, Colonel Mitchell. Dr. Martinez, I'm calling about Commander Sullivan. Sarah's heart stopped. Is he all right? Has something happened? He's fine, Colonel Mitchell said quickly. But there's been a change in his deployment schedule. His mission has been extended by another 4 months. The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. 4 more months. Their wedding would have to be postponed. They would be apart for almost half a year longer than planned. Does Jake know? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He's being informed now. I wanted to call you personally because I know you two are engaged. After the call ended, Sarah sat in her quarters staring at her engagement ring. The rational part of her mind understood that military deployments were unpredictable, but her heart was breaking at the thought of waiting so much longer to be with Jake. When Jake called 2 hours later, she could hear the disappointment in his voice. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I wanted to be home with you. I was counting down the days. It's not your fault, Sarah said, though tears were streaming down her face. I knew this was possible when I fell in love with a SEAL. Are you having second thoughts? Jake asked quietly. This is what our life will be like. Deployments, separations, uncertainty. Sarah thought about his question seriously. Was she prepared for a lifetime of this? Could she handle being married to someone whose job would take him away for months at a time? But then she thought about Jake's courage, his dedication, and the love they shared. She thought about how he had looked at her when she was operating on him in that field, and how he had proposed under the Afghan stars. No second thoughts, she said firmly. I love you, Jake Sullivan. 4 more months won't change that. I love you too, and I promise when I get back, nothing will keep us apart. The extended separation was harder than Sarah had expected. She buried herself in work, taking on extra assignments and volunteering for additional training. Her colleagues noticed her dedication and began recommending her for more challenging positions. Colonel Hayes called Sarah into her office after 3 months. Dr. Martinez, I have an opportunity for you. There's a mission coming up that requires a medical officer with your skills. It's dangerous, but it would be excellent experience. What kind of mission? Sarah asked. I can't give you details yet, but it would involve working with a SEAL team on a rescue operation. The medical officer needs to be someone who can handle combat conditions and perform advanced procedures under pressure. Sarah's pulse quickened. A mission with a SEAL team. It was exactly the kind of work she had trained for. I'm interested, she said. Good, you'll be briefed tomorrow. But Sarah, Colonel Hayes paused, this mission is scheduled for next month. It might mean you'll be deployed when Commander Sullivan returns. Sarah felt torn. She had been looking forward to Jake's return for months, and now she might miss it. But this was also the opportunity she had been preparing for. I understand, she said. When do I need to decide? Tomorrow after the briefing. That night, Sarah called Jake during one of his brief communication windows. She told him about the mission opportunity, expecting him to be upset about the timing. Instead, Jake was proud. This is what you've been training for. You have to take it. But you'll be coming home. I want to be there. Sarah, I fell in love with a woman who operates on people in combat zones. I didn't fall in love with someone who would give up opportunities to wait for me. Take the mission. His support made her love him even more. Are you sure? I'm sure. We'll have the rest of our lives together. This mission could save lives that only you can save. The next day, Sarah accepted the mission. She would be leaving for deployment just 2 weeks before Jake was scheduled to return home. They would miss each other by the smallest margin. But both understood that this was part of serving their country. As Sarah prepared for her first deployment as a military medical officer, she thought about how much her life had changed since that day she operated on a wounded SEAL commander. She was about to embark on the same kind of dangerous mission that had brought them together. But this time she was ready. Sarah's first official deployment as a military medical officer took her to Somalia, where a team of aid workers had been kidnapped by insurgents. The rescue mission required a medical officer who could handle trauma surgery in hostile conditions. Exactly the skills Sarah had developed. The SEAL team she was assigned to work with was professional and welcoming, though she could see they were initially surprised to have a relatively new female medical officer on such a dangerous mission. Their leader, Commander Brooks, had served with Jake and knew about Sarah's background. "Commander Sullivan told me about you," he said during their mission briefing. "He said you're one of the best combat medics he's ever seen." High praise from Jake. Sarah felt a surge of pride hearing that Jake had recommended her. "I won't let you down, sir." The mission lasted 2 weeks and was more intense than anything Sarah had experienced even in Afghanistan. They successfully rescued the aid workers, but not without casualties. Sarah found herself operating under fire again, this time on both enemy combatants and American soldiers. Her performance during the mission earned her recognition from the entire chain of command. When she returned to base, Colonel Hayes was waiting with news. "Dr. Martinez, you've been recommended for the Bronze Star for your actions during the rescue mission. More importantly, you've been selected for the Advanced Combat Medical Program. It's a tremendous honor." Sarah was overwhelmed. The advanced program would mean more training, more responsibility, and likely more dangerous missions. It was everything she had hoped for professionally. "There's one more thing," Colonel Hayes continued. "Commander Sullivan returned from deployment yesterday. He's been waiting to see you." Sarah's heart leaped. Jake was home. After 8 months apart, they would finally be together again. She found Jake waiting in the visitor area, looking nervous and excited. When he saw her, his face broke into the smile she had fallen in love with months ago in Afghanistan. "There's my hero," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I missed you so much," Sarah whispered, holding him tight. "I missed you too, but I'm so proud of you. I heard about the mission, about your commendation. You're becoming quite the legend around here." They spent the next 3 days together, hardly leaving each other's side. They talked about their experiences during the separation, their future plans, and their upcoming wedding. "I want to set a date," Jake said one evening, as they walked along the beach near the base. "I don't want to wait anymore." "What about deployments? What if one of us gets called away again?" Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. "Then we'll deal with it as a married couple. Sarah, I want to be your husband. I want us to have that commitment, that bond, no matter what our jobs throw at us." Sarah felt the same way. They had proven they could handle separation and the challenges of military life. It was time to make their commitment official. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's get married." They decided on a date 6 weeks away, which would give them time to plan a small ceremony and ensure both their families could attend. Jake's parents flew in from Texas and Sarah's parents came from California. The wedding planning was hectic, especially with both of them juggling military duties. Sarah was deep into her advanced training program, and Jake was preparing for his next assignment, but every moment they spent together felt precious. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah received unexpected news. She was being offered a position with an elite medical unit that worked exclusively with SEAL teams. It was the highest level of military medicine she could achieve, but it would mean even more dangerous missions and longer deployments. "Take it," Jake said immediately when she told him. "Sarah, this is what you've been working toward. You can't turn down an opportunity like this, but what about us? What about starting a family someday? This job would make that nearly impossible." Jake took her hands in his. "We'll figure it out. We always do. but I won't be the reason you don't reach your full potential." Sarah loved him even more for his support, but she was torn. She wanted the position, but she also wanted a life with Jake. "I need time to think," she told the selection committee. 2 weeks before their wedding, Jake received his own career news. He was being offered a promotion to lieutenant colonel and a position training new SEAL recruits. It would mean staying stateside for at least 2 years with minimal travel. "It's perfect timing," he told Sarah excitedly. "If you take the elite medical position, we'll both be based here. You'll deploy, but I'll be here when you get back." The pieces were falling into place. Sarah realized that Jake's new position would give them the stability they needed to handle her demanding career. She accepted the elite medical unit position the next day. The week before their wedding, both families arrived for the celebration. Jake's parents, Tom and Mary Sullivan, were warm, down-to-earth people who immediately welcomed Sarah as a daughter. Sarah's parents, despite their initial concerns about the quick engagement, had come to love Jake through his letters and phone calls. "You chose well," Sarah's mother told her the night before the wedding. "He's a good man who loves you completely." "I know," Sarah replied. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood my calling the way he does." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. The ceremony was held at the base chapel, decorated with simple white flowers and attended by about 50 family members and close friends from their military units. Sarah chose a simple but elegant dress that allowed her to move comfortably. As she walked down the aisle, she saw Jake waiting at the altar in his dress uniform, looking handsome and nervous and completely happy. When she reached him, Jake whispered, "You look beautiful." "You clean up pretty well yourself," she whispered back. The ceremony was officiated by the base chaplain, who had worked with both of them. He spoke about the unique challenges of military marriages and the strength required to love someone whose calling might put them in danger. "Sarah and Jake," he said, "your love story began in the most extraordinary circumstances. You saved each other's lives before you even knew you were falling in love. That foundation of courage and sacrifice will serve you well in the years ahead." When it came time for vows, Jake spoke first. "Sarah, you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me what real courage looks like, and you taught me what it means to love someone completely. I promise to support your dreams, to be proud of your achievements, and to love you whether we're together or apart." Sarah's vows brought tears to many eyes. "Jake, you showed me that I was capable of more than I ever imagined. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I promise to be your partner in everything, to support your mission, and to love you with the same courage you've shown me." When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Sarah with all the passion and love that had been building during their months apart. The small congregation erupted in applause. At the reception, Jake's SEAL teammates and Sarah's medical colleagues shared stories about both of them. Commander Brooks gave a toast that summed up their relationship perfectly. "To Jake and Sarah," he said, raising his glass, "two people who prove that heroes don't just save the day. Sometimes they save each other." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Sarah thought about how far they had come from that day in the Afghan field, when she operated on a wounded stranger. Now they were married, both pursuing careers they loved and facing the future together. "Any regrets?" Jake asked as they swayed to the music. Sarah looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with such gratitude when she saved his life. "Not a single one." Their wedding night was perfect, but the next morning brought a reality check. Sarah received orders for her first mission with the elite medical unit, scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. Jake would start his new training position the same day. "So it begins," Jake said, reading over her orders. "Our life as a military couple. Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked. Jake pulled her close. "I'm ready for anything as long as we're in it together." As they held each other that morning, neither of them knew that their greatest test as a couple was still ahead. Sarah's new position would take her to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, and Jake's role would put him in charge of preparing young men for the same dangers that had brought them together. Their love story was just beginning. 5 years had passed since Sarah and Jake's wedding, and their marriage had been tested by everything the military could throw at them. Sarah had completed 12 deployments with elite SEAL teams, becoming one of the most respected combat medical officers in the special operations community. Jake had successfully trained hundreds of new SEALs and had been promoted to full colonel. Their relationship had survived long separations, dangerous missions, and the constant stress of military life. They had learned to treasure their time together and trust each other completely during their time apart. Now, as Sarah returned from her latest 6-month deployment in Syria, she was carrying news that would change their lives forever. She was pregnant. Jake was waiting at the airport when her plane landed. After 5 years of these reunions, they had their routine down perfectly. He would be there with flowers. She would drop her bags and run to him, and they would hold each other like they never wanted to let go. But this time was different. This time Sarah was carrying a secret that she couldn't wait to share. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan," Jake said, spinning her around in his arms. "I missed you so much," Sarah said, breathing in his familiar scent. "And I have something to tell you. Good news or bad news?" Jake asked, setting her down and studying her face. "The best news," Sarah said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby." Jake's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, joy, concern, and then pure happiness. "Are you serious? We're going to be parents? I found out 2 weeks ago, right before I was supposed to come home. I wanted to tell you in person." Jake picked her up again, this time even more carefully. "This is incredible. How are you feeling? Are you okay? Was the flight all right?" Sarah laughed at his immediate switch to protective mode. "I'm fine. We're fine. The baby is healthy and I feel great." On the drive home, they talked about what this would mean for their careers. Sarah was already thinking about how pregnancy would affect her ability to deploy, and Jake was considering what changes he might need to make to his schedule. "I'll need to tell Colonel Hayes immediately," Sarah said. "Combat deployments are obviously out of the question now. What will you do? Will they keep you on active duty? There are options. I could work at the base hospital, or I could take a training position like yours. We'll figure it out." Jake reached over and took her hand. "Whatever you want to do, we'll make it work." This is the best news I've ever received. The next few months were a whirlwind of medical appointments, career adjustments, and preparing for their new life as parents. Sarah was assigned to the base hospital, where she worked with wounded veterans returning from combat zones. It was different from field medicine, but still meaningful work. Jake threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He read every parenting book he could find, baby-proofed their house months before it was necessary, and talked to the baby every night. "You know the baby can't actually understand you yet," Sarah said one evening as Jake spoke to her growing belly about proper tactical procedures. "It's never too early to start learning," Jake replied seriously, making Sarah laugh. Their families were thrilled about the pregnancy. Jake's parents planned to visit when the baby was born, and Sarah's parents called weekly to check on her progress. As Sarah's due date approached, Jake became increasingly nervous about being away from her. His training schedule was demanding, but he rearranged everything to ensure he would be available when she went into labor. "What if I'm in the middle of a training exercise when it happens?" he asked Sarah one evening. "Then you'll leave the exercise and come to the hospital," Sarah said calmly. "Jake, you've handled combat situations. You can handle the birth of our child. Combat is different. In combat, I know what I'm doing." Sarah smiled at her strong, confident husband's vulnerability about becoming a father. "You'll know what to do when the time comes. You always do." The baby decided to arrive 3 weeks early during one of Jake's night training sessions. Sarah's water broke at home and she called Jake while timing her contractions. "It's time," she said when he answered his phone. "Time for what?" Jake asked, clearly distracted by whatever exercise he was running. "Time for you to become a father. The baby is coming." Jake's voice immediately changed. "I'm on my way. Are you okay? Did you call the doctor? Do you need an ambulance?" "I'm fine and I'm driving myself to the hospital." "Just meet me there." "You're driving yourself?" "Sarah, that's not safe." "Jake, I've performed surgery under enemy fire. I think I can drive 10 minutes to the hospital." When Jake arrived at the hospital, still wearing his training gear, Sarah was already settled in a delivery room. The labor progressed quickly, and 6 hours later, they welcomed their daughter into the world. Emma Marie Sullivan was perfect, healthy, beautiful, and clearly strong-willed from the moment she arrived. As Jake held his daughter for the first time, Sarah saw tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Look at her, Sarah. She's absolutely perfect." "She has your eyes," Sarah said, exhausted but happy. "She has your strength." "I can tell already." The first few months of parenthood were challenging for both of them. Jake had never changed a diaper before Emma arrived. and Sarah struggled with the adjustment from high-stress military medicine to late-night feedings and diaper changes. But they figured it out together, just like they had figured out everything else in their relationship. Jake became an expert at swaddling and bottle feeding. Sarah discovered she loved reading bedtime stories, even to a baby who couldn't understand them yet. When Emma was 6 months old, Sarah received an offer that would test their family in a new way. The military wanted her to take a position developing new combat medical protocols. It would mean travel and some short deployments, but nothing like her previous assignments. "It's a great opportunity," Jake said when she told him about the offer. "You should take it." "But what about Emma? What about our family time?" "We'll make it work. Sarah, you've sacrificed your career for our family. This position would let you do important work while still being present for Emma." Sarah thought about all the sacrifices Jake had made over the years, all the times he had supported her career even when it meant separation and danger. He was right. They could make this work. She accepted the position, and they developed a new routine that allowed both of them to pursue meaningful careers while raising their daughter. Jake's training schedule was flexible enough that he could be the primary caregiver when Sarah traveled, and Sarah's new position required much less time away than her previous deployments. As Emma grew into a curious, energetic toddler, she became the center of their world. Jake taught her to throw a ball, and Sarah read her medical textbooks as bedtime stories. Emma seemed equally fascinated by both her parents' worlds. "She's going to be either a doctor or a soldier," Jake said one evening as they watched Emma carefully examine her toy stethoscope. "Or both," Sarah replied, "like her parents." On their 7th wedding anniversary, Jake surprised Sarah with a trip back to Afghanistan. Not for a mission, but to visit the clinic where they had first met. It had been rebuilt and expanded, and Dr. Ahmad was still working there. "You came back," Dr. Ahmad said, embracing them both. "And you brought your family." They spent a week in Afghanistan showing Emma the place where her parents had fallen in love. Sarah stood in the spot where she had operated on Jake 7 years earlier, holding their daughter and thinking about how much their lives had changed. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day?" Sarah asked Jake as they watched the sunset from the same spot where he had proposed. "No," Jake said firmly. "I think we were meant to find each other. Everything that happened, the ambush, your decision to come on that helicopter, the surgery in the field, it all led us here." Sarah looked at Emma, who was playing happily in the dirt, completely oblivious to the significance of where she was. She's going to grow up hearing about how her parents met. She'll think it's normal for people to fall in love during emergency surgery. "Maybe it should be normal," Jake said. "Maybe the world would be better if people fell in love while saving each other's lives." As they prepared to leave Afghanistan, Sarah realized that their story had come full circle. They had returned to where it all began, not as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but as a family built on love, courage, and mutual support. The little girl who saved a SEAL commander amid gunfire had grown into a woman who had built a life with that same commander. Their love story had begun with bullets and blood, but it had grown into something beautiful and enduring. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, they would tell her the full story of how they met. They would explain that sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places, that courage can appear when you least expect it, and that the person you save might end up saving you in return. But for now, as they flew home from Afghanistan with their daughter sleeping between them, Sarah and Jake simply held hands and looked forward to whatever adventures their future would bring. They had proven that love could survive anything: combat, separation, career changes, and the challenges of raising a family in the military. Their story had begun with Sarah saving Jake's life, but in the end, they had saved